Games with fantastic writing are a dime a dozen. It's actually hard to find a game that doesn't jump the shark in the first couple of acts, or have some horrible climax that hits you over the head with its themes.
Steen, listen to me!
That's why when I find a game that's truly well written from start to finish, it hits different because it achieves what most other games don't. I have no doubt that good writing takes incredible effort from a tremendously talented individual or group of people, and so I have a massive amount of respect for writers when they manage to pull that shit off. Now see, I'm what you might call a gamer. I've played about 10 billion story-based games. Each one has their different strengths. Maybe it's a crazy twist, or incredibly grounded world building, or a super satisfying ending. But the one thing they all have in common is that their levels of replayability are comparable. That is to say, they're all relatively low in the replayability department. Once you finish a primarily story-based game and become accustomed to its twists and turns, that's kind of it. You've experienced basically everything the game has to offer. Sure, you could go back for a repeat playthrough on a higher difficulty, or hunt down all the collectibles you missed the first time around, but the intrinsic urge to replay and engage with the game on repeat playthroughs will never be the same as the first time. It pales in comparison to roguelikes. The argument that roguelikes outmatch story-based games in the replayability department might seem incongruous, irrelevant, or even pointless. It's almost like saying cars are faster than rideable lawnmowers. They're clearly designed with different purposes in mind. Even a child knows this. Yeah, and sure, it seems obvious, but the real question is, does the difference matter? And in the case of video games, I think it absolutely does. Of course roguelikes have a hand over story-based games in the replayability department, but if you ask me, that's why the comparison matters. Yes, story-based games are designed to deliver an unforgettable first experience, but it also means they have a sort of built-in expiration date. No matter how incredible the writing, the tension, or the world building is, once you've seen it, you've seen it. A second playthrough might offer some nostalgia or a chance to appreciate foreshadowing you missed the first time, but it'll never quite hit the same way again. That's why if you ask me, replayability isn't just a bonus, it's a strength of games as a medium. Tetris to this day is still just as fun and engaging as it was on the day it released. Part of the reason why that is that there's no heavy story baggage attached to it, and no weird distracting particle effects with a weirdly distracting soundtrack. You can go back to it whenever the hell you want and enjoy strategically placing an arrangement of rectangles against a simple background and funny Russian music. Story-driven games are often designed to be consumed like traditional narratives. They're meant to be taken in, processed, and then left behind, much like a movie or a book. Games aren't just storytelling devices like books or movies. They're an interactive medium that engages players in ways traditional narratives can't. I can get beautiful cinematography from movies and shows. I can get tear-jerking narratives from books. What I can't get are these small, tense call-and-response moments between you and the game's mechanics. I can't get this kind of engagement anywhere else. Of course, what I just said is certainly subjective. Engagement in particular is extremely subjective. Some twinkle-eyed kid might find the endless visual novel-esque walls of text in Ace Attorney charming and endearing even after he's memorized every single line of dialogue, but some jaded 5 o'clock shadow flask-sipping motherfucker might just want to blow his brains out. Likewise, that kid might want to blow their brains out after replaying Binding of Isaac, but that jaded mad lad might autistically sink every hour of his waking life replaying it. I'm also being very reductive. Post-game engagement isn't just limited to replaying the game itself. You could talk with other fans about the story, dive into internet forums for theories, or even trash talk about how garbage you thought it was. And I love all that stuff, don't get me wrong. I've spent way too many hours reading deep dives into my favorite narrative-driven games. I'm also not saying games shouldn't be story-driven, nor am I saying video games are better than shows, movies, or books. A vast majority of my favorite games are heavily story-driven. I really like Better Call Saul, and I've read like 2 books in my lifetime. But there's something substantial to be said when the amount of time I spend on systems-focused games vastly overshadows the time I spend on my favorite story-driven games. Let's compare two games I really love. Slay the Spire, a roguelike deck builder, and Resident Evil 4, one of my all-time favorites. I've spoken about RE4 before, and I've done at least 5 full playthroughs of RE4 and its Ada DLC, and platinumed it on both PC and PS5, racking up about 200 hours. If I include my time with the original RE4 across multiple platforms, I'd ballpark another 200 hours. So in total, roughly 400 hours. Not bad. Now, let's see Paul Allen's total playtime with Slay the Spire. This ungodly amount of playtime doesn't even include my hours on Xbox and Switch, but I don't even need to add them to prove my point despite Slay the Spire not even cracking my top 5 GOATs. Of course, time spent in a game does not equate to how much enjoyment I get out of it, but it can certainly be indicative. My time spent with Slay the Spire absolutely obliterates my time spent with both RE4s combined. To get the obvious out of the way, I have Slay the Spire on my Switch, Xbox, PC, and phone. That last one in particular makes it dangerously easy to pull out during dull moments at the office or before bed. That's a factor for why I have so much playtime on it, sure, but that's not the reason. Slay the Spire is a roguelike, and so it's designed from the ground up for replayability. Every run is different, thanks to randomized relics, card rewards, and enemy layouts. And on top of that, there are 20 difficulties to unlock, with the last few being especially brutal. You could argue RE4 does something comparable. It has multiple difficulty settings, a ranking system that encourages you to do better on the next playthrough, and we can't forget the arcade-like mercenaries modes. And yet, despite all these factors contributing to its level of replayability, I still can't replay it to the same degree I do Slay the Spire. There are only so many times I can deal with the same villagers in the same village, only so many times I can shoot the same monk cultists in the same castle that spawn after the same exact triggers. Difficulty and randomizer mods can shake things up, sure, but they come at the price of ruining the finely curated and carefully directed experience the developers intended. And when it comes to the mercenaries mode, it's fun to get a high rank for each map and each character, but it's not the main mode. It's missing the things that make the story mode such a fantastic experience. You might ask, what about multiplayer games, either competitive or cooperative? I can just hop in and have a different experience every time, just like roguelikes. Sure, yeah, but multiplayer games are kind of a whole other beast. They rely on external factors, the skill of other players, matchmaking, meta shifts, server conditions. Your experience is shaped by the game's design, but more so by the unpredictable chaos of human behavior. Some days that means incredible one-of-a-kind moments, other days it means getting steamrolled. Roguelikes, on the other hand, don't rely on other players to generate variety. So then, what about arcade-style games? I've even mentioned one, Tetris, before. Surely, if we're talking about replayability, roguelikes versus arcade games is a better comparison. But this, too, is another beast in itself. Arcade games, similar to roguelikes, are built to be played over and over again, but they achieve it in a different way. They don't rely on procedural generation or progression mechanics. Instead, they offer a single finely tuned challenge where the variable introducing variety is mostly you, your reflexes, your pattern recognition, and your ability to optimize. In these games, there are no fundamental shifts in playstyle between runs, no branching paths, no game-altering choices, and no surprises beyond what the player brings to the table. While some arcade games offer modifiers, difficulty adjustments, or alternate modes, they largely retain the same fixed structure. Every game you play, the overall experience remains consistent. The challenge isn't in adapting to new conditions, but in perfecting execution, pushing for a higher score, surviving longer, and executing strategies with precision. This is where roguelikes set themselves apart from arcade games. They aren't just about playing better, but also about playing differently. One run might give you a completely broken build that turns you into an unstoppable force of fucking nature, while another forces you to barely survive with whatever scraps the game throws your way. This key difference changes how and why we replay these games. In an arcade game, you replay because you want to perfect your skills. In a roguelike, you replay not only because you want to perfect your skills, but you also want to adapt to what unpredictable challenge is thrown your way this time, and the next, and the one after that. If we're strictly talking about replayability, comparing roguelikes to arcade games makes perfect sense. They both offer endless gameplay loops after all, but they achieve it through different means. That's not why I'm making this comparison. I'm comparing story-driven games to roguelikes because the distinction highlights something much bigger than just replayability. It's about what makes video games special as a medium. Which brings me to a bigger point. Video games are more than just video games. They're experiences, as pretentious as that sounds. When you purchase the license to play either version of RE4, you're not only getting incredibly tight, responsive gunplay, you're also getting a, quite frankly, stupid, campy, action thriller horror story told through cinematics. If just one of these aspects is missing, something small but important to the core identity of RE4 changes. Skipping the cutscenes, you miss the developing relationship between Leon and Ashley. Turning off the sound, you lose out on the dreadful atmosphere. Ignoring the unlockables, you never wear the silly costumes. All of this is part of Resident Evil 4's experience. The story, the music, the tank controls, the atmosphere, the extra unlockables, yes, even the title screens and those weird sound effects that play when you're managing your inventory. Everything works together to create a specific, unique, and cohesive experience. And because Resident Evil 4 puts so much emphasis on things other than gameplay, its replayability is inherently limited compared to games that focus much more heavily on gameplay. This is the biggest limitation of story-based games. They don't go all in on what video games do best, interactivity. You don't mind the cutscenes that interrupt your gameplay on your first playthrough because it's part of the experience, but on your third or fourth playthroughs, you hold down whichever button it is to skip it. You've seen it all before, and nothing has changed or will change in the future. It's almost like commuting to work every day. If you had a choice between spending 30 minutes on the road fighting traffic and slapping a button next to you which would instantly teleport you to the office, you'd obviously choose the button. That's kind of a bad analogy since you have to pay attention to avoid literally dying, but you get what I mean. In Slay the Spire, it's just you playing the game. You really don't have to deal with any of that stuff, sequences that interrupt gameplay or cutscenes that you've seen a million times before. The game is just the game, and even in the case of the question mark areas, which are mostly text, it's still engaging, since they present to you an interesting, meaningful set of choices which may make or break your run. So then, are there any games that bridge the gap between replayability and a narrative-driven experience? What about Supergiant's recent game, Hades? Hades is fascinating because it finds a middle ground between narrative-driven and roguelike design. Instead of forcing you to sit through the same cutscenes or conversations over and over again, it weaves its storytelling into the gameplay itself. Dying isn't just a reset like it is in other roguelikes, as long as you reach certain points or achieve certain things. It moves the story forward, revealing new character interactions, lore, and even evolving relationships. And yet, even Hades can't completely escape the same issue that plagues other narrative-driven games. No matter how well integrated the storytelling is, you'll eventually hit a point where you've seen every possible conversation, exhausted every unique piece of dialogue, and the world stops evolving in meaningful ways. When that happens, you're left with a core gameplay loop, one that's still excellent, but without the same driving force it had when the story was unfolding. This raises an interesting question. If a game like Hades, one of the best examples of blending story and replayability, still runs into this problem, does that mean the two are fundamentally at odds? Can a game ever be infinitely replayable while also delivering a narrative experience? Maybe, but it hasn't quite been cracked yet. Maybe with the advent of AI and how massive money-grubbing corporations are trying to push AI, there might be a future where we have roguelikes with unlimited narrative depth. New runs might not just shuffle mechanics every time, but generate entirely new stories, dialogue, and character arcs on the fly. The idea sounds quite appealing on paper, I admit. Infinite procedural storytelling where every choice leads to fresh consequences and no line of dialogue ever repeats. It could be the holy grail of replayability, but there's always that catch that we hear about. It might lack the intention, nuance, and emotional weight that make human-crafted stories so impactful. A roguelike where every character reacts dynamically to your choices could be cool, but if their dialogue is just a soulless slurry of algorithmically predicted words, would it really be worth it? All that shit sounds like an interesting concept, but it's ultimately a side tangent. I don't even know why I wrote all that shit down. The goal of this video was to compare roguelikes with story-based games after all. I don't really know how to end this video, and I think I touched on every point I wanted to, so I think I'll just end it by encouraging you to play a roguelike or two. If you've never played one, now might be a good time. As of the making of this video, Elden Ring Night Rain is only a couple months away from release, so there's a little time between now and then to get some roguelike experience under your belt. And there are also plenty of other action roguelikes out right now, some of which I've mentioned in this video. There's also a trillion I haven't played that you might enjoy. Go play some roguelikes. Arcade games similar to roguelikes are built to be played over and over again, but arcade games similar to roguelikes are built to be played over and over again. Arcade games similar to roguelikes are built to be... Arcade games similar to roguelike... What the fuck?